Good afternoon, everyone. Today is Wednesday, April 24th. I'm Donna Will, Professional Development Coordinator for the Maryland Department of Health's Developmental Disabilities Administration. We welcome you to the DDA's Introduction to Self-Directed Services. On the panel today from DDA, we have Christy Colbreth, Statewide Director of Self-Directed Services. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few things about the webinar. All participants are in listen-only mode. There are two options to hear the webinar, by computer and phone, and if you look at the panel interface on your right labeled audio, you can click either computer or phone to switch for the best option. We will be recording the webinar and posting this session on the YouTube and DDA's website. Today's PowerPoint has been uploaded as an attachment and is available for you to download from the webinar panel box. Questions can be typed in the question or chat box in the webinar panel. We will be accepting questions, however, the team will review them and use them for a future FAQ. So now I'd like to introduce Christy Colbreth. Hi, Christy.
Hi, Donna. Afternoon, everybody. Just happy to have you all here today. This presentation is designed for people who are considering self-direction and for people who are currently self-directing or supporting someone to self-direct their services. This presentation is identical to last month's training that was given on March 27th. And we are excited to do it for the second time today. As Donna mentioned, my name is Christy Colbreth, the DDA Statewide Coordinator of Self-Directed Services. I'm happy to get into our agenda for today. In our agenda, we will cover the DDA service delivery models. We'll cover quickly the traditional one and spend most of our time talking about self-direction. We'll go over what exactly self-direction is and how someone chooses to self-direct. We'll go over self-direction roles and responsibilities. Then we'll review person-centered planning and budgeting in self-direction. Next, we'll go over the onboarding process with the Financial Management and Counseling Service Providers, or FMCS. And then next, we'll go over Individual and Family Directed Goods and Services, or IFDGS. Finally, we'll review some resources that are available. Next slide. In our DDA waiver services, there are two service delivery models. The first is the traditional model, where the services are provided by various DDA certified or licensed community providers. And in the traditional model, the provider assumes all responsibilities as the employer of record. In the self-directed services model, the participant or their designated representative assumes the employer and budget authority responsibilities as the employer of record. In our self-directed services model, people who self-direct have both employer and budget authority, and we'll review exactly what that means later. And self-direction promotes personal choice and control over the delivery of the services and the budget. It's important to note that in both service delivery models, the person is in the driver's seat of their own plan. Next slide. Choosing to self-direct has a specific path. The first step in self-direction is to begin creating the person-centered plan. This is the plan that explains what the person needs in order to be successful. The second step is creating the budget that is individualized for the person. And the third step is to implement that plan and budget. Implementation looks like hiring employees and vendors to provide the services that were authorized in the person-centered plan. Next slide. When you're choosing to self-direct, it's important that you make an informed choice. So with that, we have provided the DDA's Guide to Services linked here in this presentation. That includes all of the DDA's services in both models. It's also important to note that the timelines to transition to the different models may be different. This is because in self-direction, there are a few more requirements that need to be provided in order to begin self-direction. So in the next slide, we'll go over those self-directed requirements. So let's go to that next slide. Here are the requirements. As listed here on this slide are the requirements to self-direct your services. It's important first to have a finalized and DDA approved person-centered plan. A participant agreement and family and staff form are also required for anyone who self-directs. We will review those later in the presentation. It's also a requirement that both the person self-directing and employees or vendors are first onboarded with the FMCS provider before service begins. Next slide. So what is self-direction? Let's talk about it. In self-direction, self-direction expands choice and control over all the services that are received by the person. It gives the person who is self-directing the decision-making authority over those services. And that person who's self-directing, they are the employer. That means they hold the federal employer identification number with the IRS. So when employees receive their tax documentations to file their taxes, the employer's name is listed. People decide what they want to achieve, how they want to live their lives, what supports they want, and what will meet their needs. Next slide. You can self-direct some of DDA's waiver services. The person who is self-directing has employer authority with some of the services they self-direct and budget authority with all the services they self-direct. Employer authority is managing staff. This includes hiring, training, scheduling, and firing people as needed. Budget authority is making choices about how you spend the money in your budget. This includes choosing the goods and services that the person wants and who is paid to provide them. Next slide. Now we're going to review the team and their specific roles in self-direction. In the team, there is always the person who is self-directing first. Then there's always the person's CCS, or Coordinator of Community Services, and FMCS, or Financial Management and Counseling Service Provider. A support broker is part of the team if the person chooses to hire one. The team can also include any employees, providers, vendors, and contractors that the person hires. And the team can include any other person as chosen by the person who is self-directing. We've included in this slide the self-directed services handbook that goes into more detail of these roles. Next slide. So what's the participant's role? So the self-directed services participant identifies and works with their team to create their vision in their person-centered plan, and then they make all of the decisions on who works for them, including employees and vendors. The person reviews and improves all budget expenses, and that's both timesheets for employees and invoices for vendors. They interview, hire, train, manage, evaluate, and terminate any employees or contractors as they desire. And they schedule and attend meetings to review their PCP and their services that they're receiving. We've included in this slide a link to the DDA provider search to search for contractors or DDA providers who are supporting people who self-direct, including support brokers who choose to be on that provider search. Next slide. The Coordinator of Community Services, or CCS, acts as an advocate for the person and also assists with identifying resources and providers for some services. The CCS creates the person-centered plan within the LTSS Maryland system, that's the DDA's database, then works to develop the plan with the participant and their team. The CCS will conduct quarterly monitoring to ensure that the person is satisfied with their services and that the participant's needs are met. CCSs assist with the development of that PCP. They assist with ensuring that people's health and safety needs are met. They assist with developing the annual budget to be submitted for approval. And they assist with information and assistance related to support brokers and FMCS provider options. CCSs also monitor that services are being delivered in accordance with the person-centered plan and approved annual budget. And they help monitor the satisfaction that the person has with the services that they are receiving. Next slide. Support brokers are an optional service for most people who self-direct their services. Support brokers provide employer-related information and assistance with human resources. They assist people or their designated representatives with all of the human resources functions as necessary for successful self-direction. This can include initial introductory orientation related to the employer of labor, the employer of record, the Department of Labor, and applicable federal, state, and local employment requirements. Support brokers can assist with the development of staff policies, procedures, and schedules. They can coach in recruitment, advertising, and interviewing of potential staff. They can be an active member of the person's team. And support brokers must ensure that they keep their required training and certificates up to date. That includes the support broker training, first aid and CPR, and any other trainings and certifications that the person might require. Next slide. The Financial Management and Counseling Service Provider, or FMCS agency, provides accounting and payroll support, including verifying employee requirements and certifications. They conduct all background checks for employees. They manage the funds from the person's budget. They create accounting and expense reports for the team to review. And they make payments to employees and vendors at the direction of the person, both operating a payroll system for employees and distributing checks to pay for vendors. Next slide. Employees, providers, vendors, and contractors have a unique role in the team as well. They provide the services that they are hired to provide based on the schedule of the person at the direction of the person who is self-directing their services. They must maintain training and certifications that are both required by the DDA waiver and by their employer. They must always complete an initial background check as required by the waiver, and the employer may require additional background checks. And they secure periodic updates needed by the FMCS regarding any possible changes to the employee's employment status. Next slide. We're going to pivot a bit to discuss person-centered planning now. This particular slide is a timeline of person-centered planning that is not specific to self-direction, but leads into the additional self-directed steps. So this slide in particular is the person-centered planning process for anyone who is receiving DDA services. The first step in person-centered planning is pre-planning, where the participant and their coordinator of community service identify the people on the PCP team, gather any resources needed, and set the agenda for the PCP process. Next, there is the actual planning, where the participant and their chosen team identify goals, assess needs and services, and evaluates natural supports and services that already exist. Then the plan is developed. The CCS develops the plan based on the participants' choices, building a detailed service authorization into LTSS Maryland and submitting that plan in LTSS Maryland to the DDA. And then the DDA in plan authorization reviews and authorizes the plan in LTSS Maryland, which establishes the funding allocation. And with that funding allocation, the team can begin writing the individual budget. Next slide. So let's talk about creating a budget. The person's DDA self-directed services budget is where the person decides how they will use their DDA funding allocation. You'll work with your CCS and with any other identified team members to help develop a budget to pay for the supports that have been identified in the person-centered plan. The budget must be clear and meet the requirements of the DDA. The self-directed services budget that is developed is just a starting point. It can change over time to allow for some changes. The team may request, you can always request a copy of the approved budget from your CCS or FMCS that you develop. Your budget guides the FMCS to pay the bills, so it must be accurate and kept up to date. Next slide. Let's discuss the participant agreement, which is one of the required documents for anyone self-directing. The Self-Directed Services Participant Agreement documents both the participant's request for assistance in self-directing their services and the team member's agreement to assist and support with the specific work or tasks described in this agreement. The participant agreement shows the support needed to self-direct successfully using 3 options. Option 1 is that the person will manage their self-direction responsibilities themselves. Option 2 is that the person will choose another person to manage their self-direction responsibilities. This is called a designated representative. Option 3 is the person will choose team members to support them in certain responsibilities, as listed on the agreement. Next slide. The family as staff form is used by participants who are self-directing. Participants use it to inform their team, CCS, FMCS provider, and the DDA if they are hiring a relative to provide an approved DDA self-directed service. Relatives are defined as a natural or adoptive parent, step-parent, stepchild, or sibling who is not also a legal guardian or legally responsible person. The family as staff form is required for everyone who is self-directing, specifically because it does include an option to note that you are not hiring a relative. We got a couple of questions last month about that. So with the family as staff form, the person should choose one of the 3 options. Option 1 is I do not and have not planned to hire a relative. Option 2 is I want to hire a relative as my support broker. And option 3 is I want to hire a relative to be my direct support staff. If hiring a family member, the team will need to explain why and how the relative will work for the person. It's important to note that hiring a relative as a direct support staff will require the person to hire an impartial support broker. Next slide. Participants self-directing their services choose an FMCS provider that works best for them. There are 3 companies currently who are providing DDA FMCS services: GT Independence, Public Partnerships LLC, and the Arc Central Chesapeake region, who is not currently accepting new referrals. And the team would need to follow the onboarding process listed as their chosen FMCS, and we've included their websites there to contact them for additional information. Next slide. Individual and Family Directed Goods and Services, or IFDGS. IFDGS are services, equipment, activities, or supplies that support people who self-direct. And there are 3 sort of sections, three sort of buckets of IFDGS. The first is recruitment and advertising, which is up to $500 of dedicated funding for staff recruitment and advertising efforts. Then there is day-to-day administrative support and other goods and services as listed in the guidance. And here, in this slide, we've listed the IFDGS guidance and quick guide and recent webinar on those services. Next slide. How to request individual and family directed goods and services. For recruitment and advertising, that needs to be requested in the person-centered plan detailed service authorization with your CCS. For day-to-day administrative support, it can either be requested in the annual PCP process or in the revised PCP process. Either way, the day-to-day administrator does need to connect to an outcome that is listed in the PCP. And for other goods and services requests, the team must complete an IFDGS request form, and that request form is linked here in this slide. Next slide. Here we have a listing of the guidance and tools that are available. The first are our guidances. We have our Self-Directed Services Handbook, the DDA Guides to Services, the Family of Staff Guidance, and the Individual and Family Directed Goods and Services Guidance. Other tools that we have listed are the links to our FMCS agencies and the DDA provider search. Next slide. For all of the forms listed today, we do have a link to both the DDA's Self-Directed Services webpage and also each form. So we have our Self-Directed Services budget sheet and budget modification on our website. Both the budget sheet and budget modification are the most up-to-date versions of those forms. Then there's the participant agreement, family and staff form, and IFDGS request form that are all linked here as well. I want to thank you all for joining us today for this introduction to self-direction. We will leave the chat open for about 3 more minutes just to make sure we get any final questions that are that you're typing in right now. But I want to thank you so much for coming today, and please enter your questions as you have them, and we look forward to doing this presentation next month as well. Thanks so much. Have a great day. It looks like we, oh, I was about to say, it looks like that might be the last question. We can go ahead and end it.
Okay, we're going to end the webinar.